Welcome to the episode of Mujer de Exito Unbounded, Woman of Success Without Limits. And today's episode, guys, I am so incredibly grateful because today's episode is all about what? You don't speak Spanish and you're Latina? What? Right? And I have a special guest on. So this is a topic that we're going to continue to kind of massage for a while. This so happens that this week I have a couple of guests that really can help us understand that and what's the stigma behind it, and why is it that we have these preconceived notions and stereotypical thoughts, and and we've been socially indoctrinated to think that there's only one way, and there isn't only one way. So again, this is your host, Marty Angel, empowering Latina coach, Latina biz coach. And I just want to remind you that I get so excited because I get my purpose is to empower the Latina woman, the bilingual, the BIPOC woman. And my guest, like I said, is an amazing person, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But basically, people always ask me, what do you do, Marty? So here's what I do. I help the Latina and bilingual, mujerpreneur gain clarity and focus on who they serve so they can up level from brick and mortar to click and order and finally begin to rock their six-figure biz. So that's what I do. Now, as I said today, my guest is a beautiful young lady that actually I met many moons ago, and I'm not going to date myself or her. But she was my student. As you all know, I was a college professor. I'm just a newly repurposed college professor, and I'm repurposed, and I'm finding my purpose and to empower the Latina woman. But this young lady is an amazing young lady. I followed her and her success. And as I remind you, this podcast is about Latinas going from struggle to surviving to thriving. And this young lady is definitely thriving. Please help me to welcome my beautiful young guest, Leticia. Welcome to Mujer de Exito Unbounded. Please say a few words to our listeners about who are you? What do you do?
So hi everyone, my name is Leticia, as Marty said, and right now I work as a marketing manager for a cybersecurity company, and then I have my own freelance business on the side where I do copywriting and podcast producing, and that's me in a nutshell. As Marty mentioned, I met her many moons ago when I was a young lady, and so she's seen me grow over many moons. I would say about over
Don't
15
count the
years?
moons.
Over
Don't
15 years, I want to say. I could be wrong.
I
Let's not that
know.
math.
I hope you're wrong, right? Luckily, I stopped teaching college algebra for a while, and x plus y, and we're not going to do 2x plus 2y or anything like that, right?
Right. No
Um,
parabolas either.
but let me really, this is a topic that is really important, and it is something that I've run up against. And so last month was the Hispanic Heritage Month. And one of the things that I found that I thought had pretty much gone away, and I thought maybe my husband was the only one, but a lot of people have this notion, this stereotype, this indoctrination in their head that if you are Latina, you speak Spanish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that that's not always. I, as a college educator and as a K through 12 educator, know that that's not true. I personally, from experience, know that that is absolutely not true. But I would like you know, to take you back to your roots. Tell us a little bit about where you were born, and then, let's talk a little bit about what was your life like not being able to speak Spanish, and what was it like? Did people come up to you? Give us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my parents, my mom is Mexican. My dad was from El Salvador. So my dad was born in El Salvador. My mom was born in Mexico. I was born in Mexico. My mom and I, we were born in Tijuana. And when I was about 4 years old, we came to the United States. And my mom was a live-in nanny in Orange County for a wealthy family. So I came along, and so I went to a very American school community where there weren't a lot of Latinos. So when I was little, my first language was Spanish, but since my mom didn't speak it to me and she wanted me to learn English, kind of adapt to American life, she stopped speaking to me in Spanish. And then I just focused on English. I really struggled learning English as a kid. I remember in kindergarten, I think I was failing kindergarten because they called my mom and they had her come in for like a parent teacher conference. And I remember to this day, even though I'm mid-30s, I still remember being 5 years old and I couldn't get the lifespan of a toad right. And I had the whole lifespan backwards. So I knew something was wrong. And they told me that, I wasn't understanding English. And so all of elementary school, I remember I always had extra work to do. I had to
Wow.
read more. They always gave me extra credit. And so I always had to read more, write more, and do a lot of things. I remember looking up things in the encyclopedia before Google. So that's what I remember as being a kid.
Do you remember that any of the kids, the way they treated you? Do you remember any of that?
As a kid, no, I think everyone, we always just played together. But I do remember there was one other girl that was Latina in my class, and they would always put us together because I think they thought we would understand each other. But I feel like we didn't always understand each other. Like I
Yeah.
felt like her Spanish was a lot more intense than mine. So we didn't really understand each other because then I started, grasping on English, but I didn't really connect with her. And then it wasn't until like I was maybe fourth, fifth grade, that's when I really started connecting with the other kids. But I never got bullied or anything in the elementary school level.
Okay, great, great. So I, let's share stories here. I,
Hmm.
I was born in the US, and this is what I want the listeners to see is what's the contrast here. I was born in the US, of course, many moons before you were. And I was born in the US, but my parents, my dad was educated from Mexico, and
Hmm.
my mom also from Mexico. And but she came over when she was 13, so she actually graduated from high school here.
Hmm.
But Spanish was my first language as well. So, and because they came from Mexico, it was Mexican Spanish. So, and I had a completely different, that's why this is so important that people understand. Not every Latina and every Latino learns the same way. We're the same as anybody else, right? There might be more, there might be, some I'm dyslexic. I didn't know that until after I was a school principal, I was didn't even realize that when they said, but what ended up happening with me was I got actually, because I was doing so well in kindergarten, I actually got pushed up to first grade. So I went to kindergarten only half the year, and the rest of the year I went in first grade, right? I went in first grade, and I'll
Hmm.
never forget this. I was the only Spanish speaker, and to this day, I still talk to myself and answer myself, but back in the day, I was I was talking to myself. I mean, I was looking at myself. I do mirror work now, but I was talking to myself and I was looking at myself and I had this little mirror and I always would look at the mirror and talk to myself and I would talk to myself in Spanish. So, I was I was actually slapped across the face by my first grade teacher for speaking Spanish.
Mm.
So, I was wondering, did anything similar like that happen to you? Were you chastised? Were you, other than they gave you, what was the feeling like?
I think at an elementary level, I think because I was so little, I didn't really understand what was happening. It just felt like everything was hard. I always felt like I wasn't good enough, or, I felt like I had to prove myself just as much as the other kids because I felt like I was always under a microscope. And then it wasn't until middle school, my mom switched me schools from the one I was supposed to go to traditionally. And it was a bit more, how can you say it? It was more diverse than the original school I was supposed to go to, because then that's when I was like around more Latino kids, more African American kids. It wasn't just all white people and then like me and like a few Hispanic people. It felt like it was a bit more diverse. And then I was like, oh, like there's more people like me out there. It's not just me. I didn't feel so kind of out of place anymore. But even then, I felt like those kids, they didn't speak Spanish either. It was just like, okay, we're in America, we're learning English, and that was just the way it was. But then when we moved to San Diego, my senior year of high school, I moved to San Diego and I was like right at the border. So all these kids, they were, going to Mexico every weekend and all of that. And you could tell that they mostly spoke Spanish. And when we were in class, I remember the teachers were talking in Spanish. And then I remember I said something like, why are we speaking in Spanish? If we're in America, that indoctrination got in my head, like we're in America, we speak English, because I worked so hard to learn English. And I remember it was a math class. And I remember he kind of looked at me like, well, you're Mexican, you should speak Spanish. And I told him I didn't, because I didn't. And then all the other kids looked at me funny, like, why don't you speak Spanish if you're Mexican? And they told me that too.
Yeah, see, and so that's so crazy. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I mean, I'm sorry all of us had to go through that. I'm sure that many of the listeners out there have their own stories, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you were able to, you were able to wade through the, I call it the seaweed of the education world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just they put you in. Now let me ask you this:
Mm-hmm.
were you put in like special classes or whatever?
I remember for, how you have to take a language so you can graduate high school. So I was put into Spanish, but I was put not in like the regular white people version Spanish class. They put me in Spanish speaking classes, which was
Okay.
harder for me because I could barely speak it. The words were like a foreign thing to me. Writing it was something I'd never done before. And I remember like some of the words that were very long. I had a hard time enunciating, and I'm like, I can't say it. I can't say it. But I
Okay, let's
remember,
see. Let's see.
I don't know. Like,
Let,
inmediatamente, it took me a long time to learn to say.
do you roll your R's? Do you roll your R's?
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's
Carro.
hear.
Vamos al carro.
Rrrr. Rrrr. Right?
But I
So
will say this. I do remember. So when I was, I want to say a sophomore and a junior, I took Spanish class, in the Spanish speaking class. And our teacher was from, I believe he was from Costa Rica. And I remember that was the first time I ever heard kind of that guilt, like you were talking about, like, why don't you speak Spanish? You should speak Spanish. This is something that you want to pass down. When you have kids, like you want to make sure that you teach them Spanish. And he was just very harsh about it and like very had that macho pride of like, you know, if you're from wherever country that speaks Spanish, you should speak Spanish. And like to me that was a foreign concept at the time. You know, I was 15, 16, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like this whole time, you know, they've been telling me, well, you live in America, you got to learn English, you got to speak English.
Right. You know, and I get I get that, you know, being a former formal educator, right? My say you I bet you can't say that 10 times, you know, together, fast, right? Former formal educator. You know, that's about as fast as it's going to come out, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but anyway, so the sad part about this is, and this is what I, you know, being an educator, I saw this firsthand, and I saw both spectrums, both sides of the spectrum. I had, you know, I had people that were in my classes that didn't speak a lick of Spanish, but they ended up in my bilingual classes. They called it bilingual education, right? And
Mhm.
but the point was that um, they were they were supposed to be in my class, but I wasn't allowed to speak Spanish to them, which was really dumb in my opinion, because then w- then what happens is you don't really enhance their education and their comprehension, because
Mhm.
you have to comprehend something in one language in order to be able to comprehend it in another language. You can't There's no distinguish, right? You can't
Mhm.
comprehend only in one and not comprehend in the other, right? So it's important for educators to understand that if the child speaks Spanish or doesn't, then the concept needs to be taught in that language that was not their mother language, but that was their comprehension language. So
Mhm.
your comprehension language was English, even though your first language was Spanish. So
Mhm.
your comprehension language was English. So, and then because of your, I'm sure it was because of your Spanish surname that they a long time ago, and I'm witness to this, just because you had a Spanish surname, they would stick you in places that I don't think that most of the kids belonged. And
Mhm.
so, you know, and I had the opposite with me. It was like people would look at me, and then because I would tan really good, because my dad was half Mexican and half Greek. So I would tan really good like the Greeks do, right? And
Mhm.
my mom was German, but I took after my dad's skin tone, and my mom was German. And so she had blonde hair and blue eyes. So she had the reverse discrimination.
Mhm.
So she graduated, and when I spoke with her, she doesn't understand how she got her diploma if she couldn't speak a lick of English. But because she was blonde and blue eyed, they kept putting her up and putting her up and putting her up, even though she failed her English classes.
That's
You
funny.
know, and so it's the same thing almost with you, as you got caught up over here. And now let me ask you this: now
Mhm.
as an adult, has anybody ever I know that you're strong now, but you know, because you you went from struggling and feeling bad, it sounds like feeling bad
Mhm.
because you didn't speak Spanish, right? But I
Mhm.
but I think that, and we'll go back into this. I would like for you know, touch upon how you actually became this strong woman that you are, and you're very successful. And the you know, I want people to know that you know, what we do sometimes is we really chop people down because they don't speak Spanish or because they do speak Spanish. But
Mhm.
any way you look at it, it's still a prejudice. It's still a discrimination when you come in and you think, "Oh, look at she's got brown eyes, dark brown eyes, and dark brown hair.
Mhm.
She's Latina, right? And she speaks Spanish."
Mhm.
where I got the opposite when I would speak Spanish, even though they would look at me and go, "Oh, you speak Spanish?" And it was like, "Yeah." Right? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. It came in very handy, I'll tell you, as a high school teacher because the kids thought I couldn't speak Spanish.
You're like, "I know what you're
I
saying."
I know what you're saying, and I know what you're up to.
Yeah, and I do remember, like, when I first moved here and I was on the trolley and on the bus, and I remember people would try to ask me for directions, and, I was just like, "I don't know what you're trying to tell me," and I think they thought I was being rude or that I didn't wanna help them. It was just like, "I don't know how to communicate with you to help you or else I would help you," you know?
That's so beautiful. Let me tell you a story that happened to me. The other thing I look like, so I don't look like anything. I mean, people will look at me and they'll go, "Oh, I don't know if you really look Spanish, and I know you got a big nose, so maybe you're just Greek, and and all of this stuff." And so, for the longest time here in San Diego, there's a Chaldean community in El Cajon, and we used to live in El Cajon for a period of time. And I remember so clearly having my kids, and we walked into a store, and over there they speak Chaldean,
Mhm.
right? And there were some Chaldean women, and she asked me something and I couldn't speak. I didn't know what she was asking. So my eyes got really wide and I said to her, "I'm sorry." And she got angry. She actually slapped me in front of my kids
Oh my god.
because I couldn't speak the language. I'm going like, okay, even if I was learning it and you slap me, oh, honey, I'm not going to speak your language.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what were your coping skills? How did you overcome that? Because it sort of plagued you throughout, and who knows, does it, have you run up against that recently as well? What were, you know?
I think my coping mechanism is like I was always taught that everyone is different and, uh, we're not all the same. And I didn't take it personally. I was just like, this was just how I was raised. If I was taught to speak Spanish more as I kept growing up, I probably, would be okay. And I feel okay that I don't speak Spanish as well. I mean, I know a little bit now because I have to interact with my mom's family because they don't really speak English. So it's more like a Spanglish kind of situation. Then I tell them, you know what I mean? And they're like, yeah, I think so. And then my aunt has adopted my whatever. Because before I used to say whatever when I was a teenager a lot. And so sometimes she'll say, oh, like Leticia says, whatever. So I don't feel bad about it. Like if I really wanted to learn it more, I know I can. I took it in college, and I don't think there should be any shame about it, you know at all. Like it's up to you if you want to learn it or not.
Exactly. And that's the truth. And the for me, what was the turning point, and this is different. My dad was a very, he was educated, and he was actually in pre-med over in Mexico. And it was very important for him that I speak Spanish correctly. So what happened with me was when I love dancing, so I was dancing. So I tried out for the folklorico and, the Mexican regional dances, and I got accepted at the age of 12. So I was shipped to Mexico from the age of 13 every summer. So that's how I learned to read and write it. And
Hmm.
I'll tell you, I know what the kids feel like because when I got there, I could not write it. I could
Hmm.
not read it, let alone study it and take a test in it. But that's ended up what happened. In order for me to be this professional dancer, I needed to, according to them, I needed to know the history of the dance, the history of the costume, the history of
Hmm.
the culture, the history of the tradition and where that dance came about. So it was a lot of studying, And
Mhm.
that's why I speak it so well, right? That's why I
Mhm.
speak it so well. That's why I understand it so well. You know, and I continue speaking it. And, you know, when I was a teacher, well, you know, it
It came
was
in
just,
handy.
it came in really handy. It was really important. I got my bilingual credential that way. And, but not everybody, my cousins don't speak Spanish.
Mhm.
And
I have nieces and nephews now that, they were born here and everything, and they kind of understand Spanish, and they'll respond to you in English, it's like they understand a little bit, but
yeah.
they don't speak Spanish at all. And like they don't get, hate from the family like, "Oh, why don't you speak Spanish?" or anything like that. We just all find a way to understand each other.
And one of the things I need to really hit upon is the fact that speaking another language is beautiful, and it's
Mhm.
a tool. It's a tool, right? It's a tool that we can use to help others. Like you said, when you said you felt like you know, you were, when people spoke to you on the trolley, you felt like if I could speak to you, I would help you. That's what
Mhm.
happens. It's a tool. It's not a necessity. It's a tool that we can choose to learn, or we can choose not to learn. Obviously, because you technically were bilingual when you were small, because you were, as you were learning the English, you were losing the Spanish, but you were still
Mhm.
there bilingually. So the adaptation of the brain is still there for you.
Mhm.
And you could, if you chose to, you could learn it, and you would probably have way more ease than somebody who wasn't born in that environment, right?
Mhm. Because
But
I do listen to music in Spanish sometimes, and it's like I understand what they're saying, but like for me to like speak it back, sometimes, like I said, some words are really hard for me to pronounce. So it's like I understand the music and TV, and like when my family talks to me, if they don't speak too fast, I understand what they're saying, or if
okay.
I don't, I'm like, I don't know what that means. And I think
So
that's okay too to say like that you don't
yes, you
understand.
don't understand. Exactly.
And then
Exactly.
they find a way to like try to describe it to me better, and then I'm like, okay, I get where they're going or where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I want, you know, I really want to hit upon the fact that we really need to let go of that stigma that just because you're Latina, you have to speak Spanish. You know, just,
Mm,
you know, I was mentioning to you, my husband was born in TJ, but he came across, they brought him across at 1 month old.
hmm.
So, you know, so he spoke, and then you know, he spoke a different Spanish, and I want to say he spoke more they call it the rancho Spanish, right? Because his parents were you know, not educated in school. They didn't go to first grade, they didn't go to elementary school, but they spoke it. So he spoke that. Well,
Mm,
you know, and I know that when he and I met, there was a lot of embarrassment and fear, because he couldn't, you know, because he couldn't speak it well. And, you know, coming into a family like us that we were fully bilingual. I mean, fully
hmm.
bilingual. We could, you know, we could dish it out in English, and we could dish it out in Spanish, and we could dish it out, you know, right after another in both ways. And then when, you know, and then I was trilingual because I spoke French, because my other grandmother spoke French.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, learning that language was tricky, but I know that he felt embarrassed. So talk to me about that. Did you feel embarrassed? Was there ever a time that you felt like you weren't good enough?
Like I mentioned in elementary school, and then it kind of brought this shame of like, okay, I'm a foreigner, I'm from another place, I'm not like everybody else, who was born here. Obviously I had the dark hair and the dark eyes. Where I grew up, there wasn't a lot of that. Everyone was, super white with blonde hair, green eyes, blue eyes. So I always felt like I stood out. But like I said, when I went to the other school and I saw, okay, there's more of us, it's not just me looking like a space alien. There's other people that look like me. I felt like that slowly went away. But it wasn't until like I was in my 20s, 30s that I was like, okay, like I have to accept where I'm from, even though I may not speak Spanish the greatest or too much, but like that's just where my family's from. And I did learn more about the culture and the history, but just the Spanish part is not there. But
Right, the language, just the language.
yeah,
But
so like I know the music, I know the food, the holidays and things like that.
there you
And like
go.
my boyfriend's American and he's like, "Well, he's like, show me Mexican food, show me this, show me that." And I'm like, "Okay, I can do that."
But you're American.
Mhm.
I'm American. And
Yeah.
so that's what we need to come to terms with, is the fact that uh we're a melting pot. When somebody says he's American, no, he's probably, and if you
His
ask
family's
him,
Scottish.
yeah, see, I was just going to say, and he's probably, even though he was born here, he's, comes from, we all here in the US
Come
came
from
from immigrant
somewhere else.
parents. So,
Mhm.
or grandparents, let's say, even immigrant grandparents,
Mhm.
Scottish, like my mom was Spanish and German, and my father was, Greek and Mexican, and, you go through that, and then you take those tests, like 23andMe, and then you look through ancestry.com and all of that, and then you
Mhm.
realize, wait a minute, I'm not who I thought I was.
Yep. 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 Yep.
So how has this, let me just get into business now, because we're talking about you. You are a marketing manager, so and you have been an entrepreneur for the long, I've known you as an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
So how has this stigma of not being able to speak Spanish affected or not affected you?
It hasn't.
Okay. And do you think that's because you haven't let it affect you?
Mhm. And it's not something that I focus on. I try to focus on other things that I can actually bring to the table, and I don't think, that is a problem or anything.
So, let me ask you this. So I know that for me, I always felt caught in the middle. I
Mhm.
wasn't I wasn't I wasn't Mexican enough looking, and I wasn't white enough looking. So
Mhm.
there was a time period in my life, and I just want to see if there's a parallel here with you. There was a time period in my life where I didn't feel I belonged either in the US or in Mexico.
Mhm. That happened to me when we moved to San Diego, cuz like I said before, it was like everything was fine. I don't know if this sounds bad or not, but like I never, like I knew I wasn't born here, like I knew I was from another place, but I never really identified with it. Like I was never like, when I was a kid, I never was like, "Oh, I'm Mexican." I was born in Mexico, like my family's from so and so, because I wasn't raised around the culture at all. It was like, okay, we celebrate Thanksgiving and we do all the American things. When we came to San Diego, and like, I met more Mexican people, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't do Thanksgiving." To me, that was weird. I'm like, "How can you not do Thanksgiving?"
I know.
Just little things like that. And it wasn't until I was here, then I was like, okay, well, I need to like learn more about like where the family's from. Um, so that's when I was kind of like, well, I'm not really from here, but I'm not really from there either.
Mhm, mhm.
And I'm just like, well, we have our own way of doing things, like we can
Right,
celebrate Thanksgiving, we can celebrate, both Independence Days. Like it's not, no one can tell you what to do.
right, right. So let me ask you this now.
Mhm.
Now we're going to get into the business aspect. Why are you still an entrepreneur and a job person?
Because I like multiple streams of income.
Ah, she learned something from me. Okay. Yes, that's true. But tell me a little bit about, what do you feel when you're working for yourself? And
Mhm.
then what do you feel when you're working for somebody else?
I like, working for myself. I like the freedom, like, you can choose when you want to do the work. You choose the people that you work with, if you're a service provider like I am. um, and I just don't feel like you're so pigeonholed to do one thing. It's like, when I first started, I was doing like social media, I was writing blogs, I was like helping web developers build the websites, and, I know how to do email marketing and all these things. But I learned that because I was open to it, and that's what I did when I was working for myself. And so with everything that I learned working for myself with the clients that I had, that helped me get, the corporate job, because I never really had a corporate job. I did everything on my own.
Mhm.
So with everything that I learned, I was able to take it and get a six-figure corporate job.
Okay, great. Well, that's amazing. And yes, I agree with you. One of the things that I want to make sure that, this is an entrepreneurial where we get raw and real. And the truth of the matter is, you've got to really believe in multiple streams of income. You really do. And you've got to open yourself, because if there comes a time where your main big stream of income goes away, I was there. Been there, done that. My big mainstream, income went away, and whoa, it was like an eye opener. And it was that I felt like I was going down, 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 down. I hit crash. And then that's when I woke up and said, no, this isn't going to happen anymore. Now I'm
Hmm.
not going to put my eggs all in one basket. What do you think
Hmm.
about that?
No, I agree, because I've been in similar situations this year where, I got a big corporate job. I was only there for a month. They let me go, and then, luckily at the time, like, I still had my freelance clients, and I was selling clothes and, doing all these other things. So it's like I still had money coming in. It wasn't like I was completely dried out, but like it made me feel better that, I didn't rely solely on one thing, to get by.
Right, right. Yeah, that's critically important. And so let me just ask for a couple of words of wisdoms for those Latinas that do not speak Spanish. What would you say to them?
I would say, don't take it personally when people give you hate, like, why don't you speak Spanish? It's a choice if you don't speak it or if you do speak it, and just, be confident in who you are. And if you really want to learn the language, there's always the option to. There's a lot of ways now to learn it, with apps, like going back to school, or, you know, I don't know. There's just ways that you can do it. So, if you feel confident, feel good not speaking Spanish like me, like, that's totally fine. And if you want to learn it, you have the option to. So, like, just do what's best for you at the end.
At the end, yes, yes. Now let me ask you this.
Hmm.
Your entrepreneur job that you do right now, you work with you are a would you say you're like a podcast I don't know what do you call yourself? I mean, how do you introduce yourself when or how do you find clients? That's going to be important.
How? I would say with networking is very important. I had a lot of people just reach out to me on LinkedIn, because on my LinkedIn, I have that I'm a freelance, and I list all the different things that I can do.
Okay.
So I've learned that, through LinkedIn. I've also made good relationships with, my clients as well. If they know someone that needs help, that always comes my way. Also, one thing that I really learned this year was to make relationships with recruiters, which may be weird, but they always are looking for someone on a project basis, or someone to cover for somebody's maternity leave, or whatever. So I've learned that that's also like a great option if you want to do like done for you work, provide that for people. So I would say networking is the number one thing.
Networking, yes, yes. And so where can people find you and all your goodness on social media?
I'm not on social media anymore, at least business wise, but you can find
Okay.
me on LinkedIn.
Okay, they
I'll
can find
send
you on
you
LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'll send you my profile link, but I'm on LinkedIn
Okay. Why don't you do social media anymore?
because I'm lazy.
Interesting.
I'm lazy now.
She doesn't need to do it anymore, so she's not going to.
Yeah, so I'm not on social media. Like I have my personal stuff, but like business
Right.
wise, I'm not on there anymore.
Okay. And I know that you did Kajabi for a while. You were a Kajabi expert. So
Hmm.
I want people to know that if you ever need a Kajabi expert, you have to seek her out. She knows her stuff. And Kajabi, I don't, they claim that they're user friendly, and I would say they're not.
No, especially when you need to build the landing pages and do the email nurturing sequences. Those are always a
Yes.
challenge.
You definitely need somebody like that. So, Leticia, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, this week is Why Don't You Speak Spanish? And you're the first one. You're the first one. And like I said, in Friday, I have another awesome, entrepreneur woman, creator of some awesome stuff. And she's also going to tell us what she feels like and why she doesn't speak Spanish. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. And if you guys have any questions, reach out to me. I am on social media.
He beat
And
me.
I know. Send me a DM if you want to connect with her, or if you're not on LinkedIn, I will definitely send you forward to her, and I appreciate your time, Mija.
Thank you.
You have grown. You're like my daughter. I've seen you grow. I know. I've seen you grow from, student into beautiful, successful, thriving young woman, and I wish you all the best, and thank you so much, Madre,
Thank
and
you.
have a great one.
You too. Thank you.